We're going to be talking about how to spend less time coaching, which is sort of a counterintuitive approach, I think, from a sales leadership standpoint to get better results, especially ending Q4. So we're going to unpack that a bit. Some quick intros. Kyle Vamvouris, he's author of one of my favorite books, From Cold to Committed, that I've recommended to thousands of reps to go out and purchase. And he also runs a company called Vamvouris, where you consult, advise, train, do a bunch of stuff, for these early stage startups and teams. And Greg, we've done a couple of these now. Greg, CEO and founder of Abstrakt, really cool conversational intelligence tool that provides kind of like live in the moment automated coaching too, which we'll dig into. So guys, it's good to have you on.
It's going to be fun.
I'm excited.
Likewise.
All right. So I think just so we know a little bit more about you and the audience, let us know, what do? Are you a rep? Are you a sales leader? Are you a founder of a company? Let us know a little bit more about your role in the chat, and that'll give us some good context for today. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about things from a coaching standpoint. We got BDR manager, SDR manager.
Nice.
Cool. Okay, this is sort of what I expected to see. Yep. Very cool. Okay, so Kyle, I want to kick the first question your way. When we were prepping for this, we kind of sat down and unpacked, like, hey, what are a lot of like kind of the big problems that we see across sales teams, and especially in your work? One of the things that you had mentioned is that individual reps don't know what it takes to be successful. Can you like just double click into that and let's unpack that a little bit first to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So often I find that a lot of sales reps, especially at organizations that are still maturing as a sales org, they don't know exactly what they have to do to be successful. And what that means is how many activities do I have to do? How many people do I need to talk to? How should my calls go? What process should I follow throughout my sales process? And what they do is they take steps from old companies or things that they read on LinkedIn, and they sort of Frankenstein together something that they feel like is working, but there's no real clarity of if this is going to be what it takes to hit your number. And as leaders, I believe it's our responsibility to lay out exactly what it takes in order for an individual sales rep at our organization to be successful. So when I talk about not knowing what to do to be successful, is exactly what I mean. Is we're doing our best, but we're just not 100% confident that what we're doing is going to lead to the result we're looking for.
So metrics, I'll kick this question your way, Greg, because you've gone through this as a startup here in this last couple of years, and you're hiring a sales team, and you talk to a lot of prospects, and you've sat in the seat of a sales leader at many different startups prior to starting Abstrakt. What have you seen on the topic of numbers and activity and essentially giving the blueprint to the rep? What have you seen or not seen in your experience?
So what's interesting is when I started my career as an SDR, I had a very clear sales math formula that I was given. 120 dials a day. I could reliably drive 12 to 13 conversations and drive 2 to 3 meetings. Of that, one would be qualified. Acton Software, the company I worked for, I think we had 120 SDRs, and it was a machine. It was a very, very, very well-oiled machine that drove very predictable revenue growth. Then I went to a company called Allbound, where it was, I don't know, like, let's figure it out. And so at that early stage, I initially, when I was started as director of sales, I tried to take that same approach of like sales math and apply it to my new SDR team. I think I had 2 reps, and it didn't work at all. It failed miserably. And so we realized that we had to actually cut activity in half and go much more quality over quantity. And so we had to figure that sales math out. It took us like a year to really nail that process down. And it goes back to, I think, stage of company, the market you're going into. So what I've seen, and I've talked with other sales leaders about this, even our customers, is they take previous experiences and try to apply them to their current role, or they take what they see on LinkedIn and apply it to their business or their market or their vertical. And they kind of wonder why it's not working. And I think the thing is, like, everybody's different, right? You have to kind of figure it out specific to your stage of company, your market, your buyer persona, all that stuff. So to summarize, long story short, I've seen a lot of bad things happen from trying to do things because somebody told you to do it that way, as opposed to being a little bit more, I guess, curious with exploring different other options. And so you have to be open to that.
Whew. Okay, I want to spend some time on this topic because, and I'm curious, just with the audience, your metrics, let us know, yes or no, do you give your reps like standardized metrics? But more importantly, what I want to know is if you give them, where did those numbers come from? Is it based on historicals, or has there just been always kind of a standard set? Let us know in the chat. Do you have this type of sales math provided for your reps? And if you do, give us a yes or a no. If it's a yes, how did you guys come up with those numbers? Let us know in the chat.
Yeah, I'm excited to read these.
Swap Nil, I hope I'm probably not pronouncing your name correctly. My bad. Based on company targets. Rachel says based on historicals. What about for the rest of you guys? Yeah, historic data, Jorge says.
Hey, you pronounced it correctly.
I got it. Awesome.
Oh, Jason, you're so good.
Yeah. Okay. So this is really interesting. So Kyle, this is something that you spend quite a bit of time on in the work that you do. There's kind of a couple of extremes almost that I even see in the responses where it's a lot of times we have this company target and then we take the number of reps that we have and then we just do the math to figure out what each rep needs to do. And I don't know, Greg, you said $125 dials. I'm like, woo, that's a lot of dials. You know, that's like 5 hours of like, if someone doesn't got a dialer, of dialing a day, which is aggressive in my opinion. Yeah, he's like, probably didn't have time to breathe very much, you know, throughout the day. But I see that one end where it's, hey, let's just back down from the company target. And then there's people that are using historicals, and I'm sure there's kind of a blend of the two. But Kyle, if someone is maybe approaching this from scratch and has not done this activity before, or they're just reevaluating the activity requirements, what are some kind of principles that a sales leader should do to really, you know, come up with something that's realistic and has actual meaning behind it versus just throwing a number out?
So a lot of folks, they skip important data points along the journey of what it takes to go from a revenue target backwards into how much activity they need to see from their reps. And like, here's a classic one. A classic one is show rate. A lot of models skip out on show rate and they assume 100% show up, which is not true. Also, qualified rate's another one that people often miss. So of the meetings that show up, what percentage of them actually qualify? So the first problem that people run into is when they're working backwards, they miss out on some really important numbers that have a huge impact on the metrics that you're hitting. Actually, I just went through recently an example where we had somebody come to us who had a $2 million revenue target. And I can pull up the numbers at some point if you want me to go through it in detail, but they had a $2 million revenue target. They were planning on hiring one SDR, one AE. 3 months later, hiring another SDR, another AE. And then 2 months after that, hiring another SDR, another AE to eventually get into a team of 3 and 3. So we did the math. For their perspective was, this is what we need to hit a $2 million target. That's what they told the new board when they just raised funding. We did the math and they were going, with that team, they would hit 1.2 million. So a pretty big miss from the $2 million target they told the board. So that has to completely change how you create the team. Also, what the composition of that team, what's the ratio of SDRs to AE. So the math is incredibly important. Working backwards is useful if you don't have historical data that you can really rely on. You have to use the most conservative numbers you have. And if a founder was doing the sales beforehand, there should be something that you can use where you can kind of reduce that number by a certain percentage to make it a bit more realistic. But if you do have some historical data, you can at least rely on something, and then you construct the plan around that.
Who would you build the numbers around? And where I'm kind of going with that question is, like, if you have, let's say, a sales team with 20 people, do you build it around just the average? Is that enough people to just go by the average? Do you take out the people that are really, really good and the people that are really bad and do more of a, I don't know what the math term is if it's not the median?
The median.
I guess it is. Like, how do you recommend approaching that, Kyle?
So if you have a large enough team, I think an average is okay. The median's okay as well. There's going to be some assumptions that you make. And I do often recommend splitting your team in, splitting the top performers out. And the gap between your average performer and a top performer is your kind of your stretch, right? Like, how can I get more of my average performers to be top performers? But at the early stage, you have no choice but to use the most realistic number, and an average is sometimes okay there. Like if you have 2 reps and they're performing and one's performing way better than the other, I don't think an average is really useful. You have to figure out like, why is the one that's outperforming, and then use a number either based on their performance, because that's a more accurate reflection of the results of activity, or do it based on the other rep who is not performing as much, but there could be an argument that rep shouldn't be at the organization anymore. So it gets a little bit trickier the smaller the team is.
Yeah. And JC, can I jump in on that real quick?
Absolutely.
One of my favorite sales leaders, a guy named Tim Maloney, he took that kind of, he's read some pretty large teams, and he always talks about Pareto distribution, the 80-20 rule. You know, top performers usually drive the most amount of revenue. And one thing that I see a lot of companies do is they apply like an average and their metrics across the entire team. So they do like your show rate across the entire team, your qualification rate across the entire team. And what they don't take account for is, as the reps performance slips or you get better performing reps, those metrics, those conversion points also change. A higher performing rep will qualify a deal X% higher than a lower performing rep who doesn't know how to qualify. And so you have to take your specific kind of metrics at a more granular level, and you have to maybe kind of tranche out your reps or group your reps based upon C players, B players, A players, and then get very granular with those metrics through the funnel if you want to build that sales math in a very predictable way.
Can I ask a quick question to the audience here? How many of you are tracking all pieces of rep performance on a per rep basis? So you're looking at show rate per rep, you're looking at phone conversion per rep. If it's salespeople, deal stage 1 to deal stage 2 conversion per rep. I would be curious, just type in yes or no in the chat if you do or don't track it at that level of granularity.
I find that most companies do not.
Yeah, most companies don't.
Even really large orgs. Can you give a couple more granular type of things that you track?
Yeah,
like
so
you're looking at conversion of phone versus email and comparing the two. Like, what are some of the other areas?
So here, there's 7 metrics that I typically look at that are a little bit higher level, and then there's some that are even more granular. But the first is number of activities per rep. Everyone's tracking that. The percentage of activities that lead to some kind of engagement. So for calls, that's somebody answering the phone. For emails, that's somebody replying, LinkedIn replying, etc. Then the percentage of those engagements, so phone connects, replies, that lead to appointments, and you do that per channel. And then the percentage of appointments that actually make it to deal stage 1. So part of that's going to be show rate. Another part of that's going to be qualification rate. And then deal stage 1 to deal stage 2 conversion, deal stage 2 to deal stage 3 conversion, et cetera, until you get to the final deal stage to close 1 conversion.
Yeah, I'm just writing these down.
And almost nobody. Oh yeah. And I have a sheet I can give everybody on this. If you guys want to, you just type it in there. I'll send the link over. And one of the things that's helpful about getting to that level of granularity is because you know exactly where you need to focus to improve the high level results of the entire team, but also on the individual level, right? Because the high level results are great, but to Greg's point earlier, I think he made a really, really strong point, which is these metrics shift over time, and you have top performers that end up being more tippity top, and you have low performers that end up slipping to more lower levels. And yeah, we could look at the high level numbers and say, look, everything's great, but actually we had a big jump from our top performers and a big drop from our low performers, which makes our overall numbers look great. But what are we doing as leaders to help enable the people that might be slipping, that are slipping?
Yeah.
And I'll send this Google link here to the sheet I use.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that the point that I think is important to make here too is that this whole webinar today is about how to basically how to do more coaching at scale, or how to get reps to coach themselves a little bit more, right? That's kind of the whole point. And I think that what's super important here is, by using Kyle's sheet there, what you can do is create a culture where I can diagnose a problem correctly. Or as a rep, I can self-diagnose. Because I think a lot of times the answer for results that are not there is just more activity. And specifically looking at, think about how well you can coach someone when you know that they're not getting meetings, specifically because people do reply to their emails, but the conversion rate of email replies into meetings booked is lower than the average. And then you can dig in and be like, oh, wow, they get these like objections that they don't know how to respond to.
Right.
Or they're not simply just picking up the phone and calling a prospect when they get emailed an objection back. It allows you to be really, really super granular. I want to just share one more resource. If you're setting up metrics from scratch and you just want to know kind of industry-wide based on your sales motion, what kind of metrics everyone else kind of measures and what the baselines are, the Bridge Group has got some really good data that they release on a yearly basis too that might give you a good baseline, to get started. I got one last question on sales math before we move to the next topic. What activity level requirements would you hear? I'll just kick this out to both of you. What activity level requirements, if you heard from a sales leader for email and phone on a weekly basis, would just be like, that's way too much? I don't care what your sales math is. That's just way too much to demand of a person to do. What is that like ceiling in your guys' mind? And maybe what's the floor too? What if you hear something like, whoa, what are you doing? That's so low. What's kind of the ceiling and floor for both of you? And I know that this is maybe not going to apply contextually across things, but what do you guys think?
Are we dialer or no dialer?
Let's say no dialer. I have a point and click, type of solution. I don't have any like an Orem or anything like that.
I'll jump in first. So if a sales leader was saying, hey, I'm expecting 150 calls a day from my team plus emails, and they don't really, usually if somebody has a really aggressive call number, they don't really have an email number. That's when I start going like, okay, that's a little aggressive. 120, I see my typical benchmark is 100 activities per day per SDR, specifically cold call. And then I will only count personalized emails as an activity as well, obviously, because if it's automated, that's not them doing something. So that's, I still track those numbers, but as far as like understanding the capacity of a rep, I usually will land somewhere around 100 activities per SDR per day.
How much, if someone is point and click, in your opinion, what is a realistic, taking in consideration that a connect rate is going to be somewhere between 5 and 10%, how many calls would a rep realistically make per hour, just so people have some kind of metrics?
It really depends on connect rate. It really depends on connect rate, but per hour, I would expect around 30 calls.
Yeah. And I think that teaching people, that's another really big thing when you're helping if you have the sales math, you got to really backtrack that into helping the rep craft a perfect day and a perfect week. So how many hours does it take to do this? And don't just have a call block on your schedule. Have like a specific activity metric that you need to hit. Greg, what's your take on this?
I'm going to rain on your parade a little bit. I don't like those numbers. To me, just as a nature of what we do, we get even a little bit more granular than that. So I look at like, I don't care if anybody makes 30 calls a day. I don't care if you make 100 calls a day. What I care about is that of those calls, did you hit on the right opener? Did you attempt a soft close? Did you deliver the right customer story? Are you actually completing the playbook for that specific activity that I want you to complete, which to me is more of a leading indicator of future success than activity. And so I would rather Sam make 10 calls a day where he knocks it out of the park, even if it's only one convert on those 10 calls. That's why I don't like activity metrics, because I think reps end up just picking up the phone and making dials for activity's sake. That's why I don't assign an activity number. I'm going to politely refuse to answer your question.
Yeah, we have a different approach. I'm very passionate about activity numbers.
Yeah.
So Greg, this is good to have a healthy debate on this. So what is the number that you're tracking though? Because like, let's say he's making 10 calls a day and he talks to one person. I mean, statistically, he's probably only going to book one out of every 3 or 4 people into a meeting. That would be very good if he did that. Yeah. So how do you talk about, like, what if someone is not making enough calls? How do you have that conversation?
So to me, calls, again, that's a quota. That's a lagging indicator of success. Calls is a leading indicator of success, like your activity. To me, I don't care if you make 10 calls a day and hit your number, or make 100 calls a day and hit your number. If you're not hitting your number, that's the conversation I want to have. And to me, the answer is not you need to make more phone calls. It's what's going on the phone calls you're actually making that are resulting in you not hitting your number.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'd rather work.
But what if they're just not having enough conversations?
Then they need to have more, and they need to make more dials. So if you're having them.
Yeah. How do you determine? Sorry, I keep cutting you off. How do you determine? Because I think some people like are listening like, Kyle, okay, I have specific activity metrics, and they're hearing your approach, like, hey, the quality based approach, all that other stuff. There's like a number element to that. But how do you set an expectation around, like, because this happens all the time with sales teams that I see where they do quality and it's just like, it's like, there's just not enough activity. There's not enough volume of like quality, you know? I'm just curious how you think about that and approach a situation like that.
So we work back from our numbers, right? So we have a certain revenue target that we need to hit as a company. We're still a small team. We like to keep lean and mean. I know I'm still running sales for Abstrakt. I know how many meetings a week I can comfortably handle to drive through the pipeline. And so when I look at like Sam's productivity, my SDR, I know that if he generates 1 meeting a day, that I'm perfectly okay with that, because 50% of those are going to turn into qualified opportunities. And so right now, he'll generate 1 meeting a day. He'll make like 23 phone calls and generally connect with like 4 or 5 people. And so they're highly targeted, highly specific, very quality conversations. We eat our own dog food. We use our own software. And so I'm okay with that math right now.
So let me jump in here because I definitely have a different opinion here. And look, I agree. The one thing I will say is I totally agree. If we're hitting the outcomes we're looking to hit, we're fine. Then I have no problem whatsoever. But I have to understand the numbers that it takes to hit those activities. And the reality is, and people can disagree with this if they want, but the reality is there is no quality without quantity. Picasso did over 18,000 paintings. And he's one of the, one of the most famous artists of all time. There's a certain expectation of quality that's a prerequisite, of quantity that's a prerequisite to quality. The more conversations you have, the better you get at having conversations. If a sales rep does 1 demo a week and then ends up bumping up to doing 1 demo a day, they get better at doing the demo. It's just the reality because we have a lot more reps. One of the biggest value props of using a dialer like an Orem is you get to have more conversations per day, which makes you better at the conversations. Now, if you're hitting the result that I'm looking for and you're doing 20 calls a day, great. Keep doing that. I'm not going to, influence that in any way, but I will have a number that I say, look, I know if you do 50 calls a day, you're going to hit the number. And if you're not hitting my result, then I expect you to do 50 calls a day, whatever the example is.
Yeah. I think a good happy medium here is that activity metric should be different for every rep. Like it should be according to their sales math. What are their conversions?
Right.
What's their pickup rate? What do they convert into a call? And I think as a rep, you should know, like, what is the number of calls based on my conversions that I need to make in order to hit that?
And calls is in their control. I think that's an important
Yeah.
thing to acknowledge. Call activity is in their control. How many people pick up the phone is not in their control. Some days you might have a 20% connect rate. Other days you might have a 10% connect rate.
Yeah. Let's shift gears, you guys, because we could, Greg, one more final thought, and then because we could talk about this the entire time, and we'll have people jumping off. What were you going to say, Greg?
I was going to say, like, the reason why it takes so many reps to get good at something is because you fail and fail and fail and fail and fail until you become good at something. Picasso wouldn't have needed 18,000 paintings if he had software telling him how to craft the perfect painting on day one. So times have changed.
I'm actually not sure if that's 100% true, because I think it's also perfect practice that gets you there. And what perfect looks like is very dependent on the situations that you encounter. And every cold call is very different, right? And we can do all the coaching we want. There's still going to be edge cases. So I do agree having, Picasso would probably have to do less paintings if he had some support, but I think there's still going to be a large quantity that's required to get to that level of ability.
We'll agree to disagree.
Fair.
No, I love this. I just, not to take neutral ground, I think there's a balance between the two. I think you need to have both. There has to be both.
Totally.
But again, let's shift gears a bit. I want to talk about this culture piece around like self-diagnosing problems. And I think we talked about it from a high level standpoint, from an activity and an outcome standpoint. I think if we drill in now and look at how do we help people grade the quality of their activity. So if we're going to say, hey, we want higher quality cold calls, higher quality cold emails, how do we establish what is good versus bad so that we have a good leading indicator of what's going to generate the outcome that we want? So I'll kick this question your way, Greg, first. My head goes to scorecards. And I don't know about you, most organizations I've seen, they don't really have a clear way that they grade stuff. It's just, did it work or not? And I'm a really big believer, Annie Duke, I don't know if you guys have heard of her. She wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. And she's an ex-professional poker player. And the whole book is about decisions versus outcomes. And it was, hey, just because you make a good decision doesn't always mean that the outcome's going to be good, but that doesn't make it a bad decision. The example she gave was wearing a seatbelt. If you wear a seatbelt every single day for 365 days in a year and you get in a really bad car wreck and hurt yourself, the outcome was bad, but wearing the seatbelt was not a bad decision, right? And I think that we need that type of stuff in sales with scorecarding. So how do you think about scorecards, Greg?
So I 100% agree that a lot of it is subjective when it comes to scorecarding today, when managers sit down with reps. I think it's all outcome based, usually, like, did you book the meeting or not? And so I really encourage people to get more granular with that. Because again, yes, this call ended well. You might have done a horrible job qualifying that person, but still got the meeting. Or you might have done an amazing job qualifying a prospect, but did not get the meeting. I will take a SDR who has amazing conversations and uses the correct permission-based opener, uses the right customer story, uses the right probing questions, and asks for the soft close in the meeting, but still doesn't get that outcome. I'll take that rep over the rep that just forces a meeting down a prospect's throat every single day. And so when I think of call scorecarding, I think of getting very, very granular with, did you do the small things well every day, every step, every call? And then the kind of the lagging indicator of results will come. And when you don't punish people for doing the right thing, but still not getting the result you want, I think it lends itself to creating a culture where people are okay failing and okay continuing to try to iterate on things and improve over time. And as long as you don't reward the rep who does a shitty job just throwing meetings on the calendar every single day and don't post them up on a pedestal, I think all those things kind of bundled together. create a good culture for kind of self-diagnosis.
Yeah, and it gives you these like mental wins too. Maintaining that motivation if you're not getting the outcome that you want. Kyle, anything you would add to that? And what components do you feel like are important to have? Like, what are the components of a good scorecard? And then we have an example we'll show you guys too.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Greg here. I mean, I think it's incredibly important that we look at how well a rep executed on each part of a cold call in this example that leads to the ideal result. And, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I used to play competitive Magic the Gathering. So I was one of these nerds that would travel all over the country in order to compete playing a tabletop card game. And one of the things we talk about a lot, I think it comes from poker theory, is this idea of having results-oriented thinking. So I'll tell a quick story just to illustrate this. I was practicing for a big tournament with a good friend of mine who is, multiple champion, really, really good player. And at one point he says to me, he's like, Kyle, why do you keep doing this? And it was some specific thing that I would keep doing in the games that we were practicing. And I told him, because of X, Y, or Z. Doesn't matter. You guys don't play Magic, so I'm not going to tell you the scenario and bore you with that.
I played Magic in high school a lot. So
there you go. Okay, well maybe I could have gone into more detail. But anyway, so he's like, "Why do you keep doing that?" I kind of explained why, and he goes, "Right. Well, that might have worked in that one situation, but just because it worked once doesn't mean it was the correct thing to do." And I developed a habit based on a result that I started doing over and over again. That was actually a mistake, but happened to work once. And that's something that you see with SDRs all the time. For example, if you ever close your eyes for 2 weeks and open them again and start listening to cold calls, all of your reps will all of a sudden start pitching your product or service really early in the cold call. And you're like, whoa, what happened to all the questions and good conversation stuff? And they're like, I just kind of slipped. And it was because they did it once because they had to, because the person was like extra aggressive or something, and it worked. So they just started pulling that earlier and doing it. And it actually hurts their overall results. So that's just a random example, but yeah, I totally agree. I think being results oriented in your thinking can lead to a lot of trouble.
I have a story to share with that as well. One time I said something to a prospect that was not nice. I was getting irritated that they weren't being truthful with me about their purchasing kind of process. And I was like, "You're being a dick. Like, you're not being truthful. Like, this is not, I don't want to do business with you." And immediately flipped. 2 days later, I had the contract signed. And wrong decision, outcome was great. I tried that 2 more times and realized that does not work well.
What do you mean? They call that the "you're a dick" close. You haven't. Yeah, there's a lot of methodology around this.
So I have a very real life example as it pertains to sales to you. Bad decision, good outcome. Thinking that's a great idea. 2 days later, didn't work out so well.
Right.
Yeah. So let's take a look at how a scorecard can remove some of that ambiguity. What I would love from you guys as I share this, I'll kind of walk people through it. I would love for your guys' critique if you have it too, and I'll share this in the chat with everyone so that you can take it. So this was really developed. There you go. Check out the chat. Make a copy of that. This was really developed out of, doing cold calling training for companies and giving their managers a tool to assess whether or not people were implementing some of the stuff that we wanted them to implement from the training. And again, to your point, Greg and Kyle, how do we get reps to get some of these small wins where they feel like they're starting to do the things that they need to, even if it's not generating a positive outcome yet? So this just kind of breaks down the call into 3 parts here. But it's very there's a few things in here that are kind of subjective, but it's really attempting to be as objective as possible. So with permission-based intro, did you use one? Did it not sound smooth? Or did you nail it? Really easy kind of stuff here. And then doing that throughout the entire call. And the beauty of this is, as a manager or a sales leader with managers right now, what you should have your reps do and your managers, every one-on-one, before you do that, have the rep grade their own cold call and put the score in here. And then you as a manager go in second and then you score it. And then the coaching opportunity is typically around where there are discrepancies between the two, because there's some sort of knowledge gap there. There's something that the rep is not able to self-diagnose in themselves. There's something that they're completely blind to and don't see. But I'll go ahead and pause there. What do you guys think of this? Is there stuff that you would add to this, critique, just from like what's here and like elements that might be missing or stuff that you like about it? And we can kind of talk about, because what I'm hoping is that people take this scorecard and kind of adapt and make it their own.
Yeah, this is great.
So I'm going to shameless plug a little bit here, Jason. So this is one of the reasons why we built Abstrakt, is because we wanted to take the subjectivity out of scorecarding. We wanted to make it a yes or no, black and white. We also didn't want reps to have to wait for this. So after every single phone call, 2 seconds after it's over, reps will see their call scorecard. What I think is missing is a component where rep and manager sit down and go through the nuances of every single call. So what I really like that we struggle with from a software perspective is the confidence. Sounds like a trusted peer. The more tone component, how it was delivered, is probably more important than was it delivered. Were you distracted in how you spoke? Did you sound confident? Did you speak well? Did you pause at the way you were supposed to pause? Did you enunciate? Did you all those nuances that make it pretty hard for software to measure? I think that is what needs to be in call scorecards more, and that's where reps and managers should spend their time focusing when reviewing calls, is in the confidence and tone and delivery of the nuanced parts of a call.
Well, it's the part that actually requires a human being, right? So with Abstrakt, like, why not get 80% of it done? Hey, did they use a permission-based opener? Did they use customer-oriented language? Did they attempt to use the objection handler when they were prompted to do it? Like, that can be automated. Like, I can get a report that tells me that or not and do the heavy lifting. I think because the hard part about coaching, if you don't have tools and scorecards, is that you just sit there and you listen through entire recordings.
Yep.
You think about the amount of hours that takes. And granted, there is totally a time and place to do that, for sure. But I think having something, know what those objective measurements are, the yes or no type of stuff, know what the qualitative stuff is, and figure out a way, if you can, to use your conversational intelligence tools to automate some of that and to provide some information and give you some quick feedback. Kyle, what do you have to add?
So I love this. And one thing that I definitely want to add is there should be an expectation for the individual reps on your team that they do this in their own time too. When I was an SDR, I had a 45-minute BART ride in and out of the city. And every day I was listening to calls on that ride. And I was figuring out, what could I have done better? How could I tweak this? And I get, there's a lot of thought leadership around the responsibility of the leadership to coach, train, and enable your team to be successful. And I definitely encourage that. I'm a big believer in that. At the same time, the reps have to take ownership of this too. So one of the things I like a lot about your sheet there, your scorecard there, Jason, is that the reps get to score themselves. And to to expand on one of the points you made earlier, we shouldn't have to listen to every single call every single time. The rep should listen to a call and score themselves. And when they identify an area that they really don't know what they should have done better, they just know it should have been better, let's listen to that part of the call. I think that's a really, really helpful practice to kind of use.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick on that, Jason? I want to kind of build on that.
You bet.
Again, go back to culture, like making sure you're hiring people and you're encouraging reps to do that coaching themselves. I see so many reps that rely upon managers to provide that coaching. And so one of the big things, and this is out of the scope of our conversation, but just finding reps that are coachable. Like, I look at three things: coachability, intrinsic motivation, and curiosity as three indicators of success in sales. number one is coachability for a reason, because we want somebody that is self-coached, self-taught, self-diagnoses, and everything you can do to facilitate a culture around reps taking ownership of that is going to pay huge dividends later.
And those reps are going to do better. I mean, that's like at the end of the day, like I do feel like there's a lot of criticism on leadership when it comes to kind of the coaching and developing the team and what requirements we have for our team to have a growth mindset. And I only want people on my team who are dedicated during and outside of work on improving themselves, both professionally and personally. Because I believe your outside of work life is doing good, your inside of work life will do well as well. So I want people who are dedicated to self-improvement beyond just the scope of work.
Yeah.
Let's talk about culture. That's kind of the last of the three parts here. So far we've talked about scorecarding, this more numbers oriented, this objective approach to diagnosing, the sales math, that sort of stuff. Let's talk about culture. How do we... Okay, I want to step back and be kind of like very simple here in this approach, Kyle. I want to kick this question your way. Like, what is culture? Like when someone says we have a culture here where reps coach themselves, like what does that mean to you? Like that word culture, and how do we create culture? Like what is it?
So I can keep this very, very simple. It's how the team behaves when they are by themselves, right? It's almost like character is what you do when no one's watching. Like culture is what the team does when leadership isn't forcing something to be done.
Yeah.
And if there's a culture of kind of self-improvement or self-evaluation, then they are doing that whether the leader is going to look at it or not. It's part of the culture. It's what they want to do to get better. It comes from the leader. I'm incredibly self-critical and I'm constantly trying to improve what I do. And I empower my team to do the exact same thing. So it comes from leadership, but it's what happens outside of my influence.
Yeah. How do you think about culture, Greg?
I love that you said like it starts at the top, Kyle. Like you have to lead by example. So if you're willing to jump on a call, you're willing to share a call with your entire team, like, hey, I screwed this up. Let's all listen to it, guys. Like if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to be first in, last out, if you're willing to cold call right alongside your team, if you are willing to handle demo requests or chats at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, like you lead by example every step of the way, and you'll be shocked. And it makes your life so much easier because your reps start emulating that behavior and wanting to become better themselves. And so as opposed to taking the time to be like, you need to do this, you have to do this, you're responsible for this, just do it yourself. And then your reps kind of like follow along. And the ones that don't, they find a way to leave your team. Like it's kind of shocking. They just actually like find a way to manage themselves out of the company because they feel themselves being separated from the rest of the team.
Yeah. It's the whole actions speak louder than words. Yeah, there's another term that I was taught as a sales manager, and it's rubbing shoulders. And this concept of rubbing shoulders was my first job as a sales manager was at 19, and it was leading teams of college students going door to door selling house painting services. And a big push that they do in the summer is when we start painting homes, like going door to door and like telling all the neighbors in that neighborhood, right? Well, by that time, people have been doing it for 3 or 4 months. They're kind of burnt out of doing the door to door thing. And I remember having this meeting with all of our sales managers and our VP, Dan, on the call, and he was pissed at us because we weren't leading the charge with the team. And while we were in the field visiting them, doing door to door with them, you know? And I think there's such an important lesson there that I've taken just with inside sales too. It's like, you can't be the manager that doesn't know how to cold call. Like you got to get in the pit, dude, and make some calls together. And like you said, Greg, like grade yourself in front of the team. Show that you are coachable, you know?
Yeah.
I want to throw another question out for you guys on the culture side of things. Kyle, you had mentioned, one of the big problems in the work that you do that you see is a culture where poor performance is tolerated. Can we talk about that for a second? where then there might be a sales manager, let's say, that's in a role where, they don't have as much impact in the entire org's culture than on their team,
Right.
So how might one, kind of think about this in sort of elevating everyone's standards? How do we do that?
So this is going to come across a little bit blunt, but it's just the reality is sales is a performance-based part of the organization. If someone's not performing and you've given them what they need to be able to perform, then you have to let them go. If not, that's the message that sends to the broader organization within the sales team and beyond, actually, but especially within the sales team, is that, hey, it's okay not to do well here. That's not what I want. I want people who want to do really well always. I'll tell a quick story here. I was speaking at a conference last week, and afterwards I was sitting down with probably 12 founders. And I was talking to one of them to the right of me who has a sales background. Him and I were talking about cold calling. And this other person across from us, who's also a founder, says, we tried cold calling, didn't work for us. And we looked at him because we knew his product, and we said, give us one of your leads. And him and I just started cold calling, and we were getting rejected. We were laughing. And one of the most exciting experiences that I've had in a while, because it's just me and this founder, both of which, don't cold call very often. And we were having so much fun just dialing, trying to figure out what it's going to take to book a meeting for him. And the guy next to me, Joe actually booked one on his third call. And we were so fired up. We were yelling. We were excited. That is a culture that exists within his company too. We're excited. We're excited to try new things. It's okay to get rejected. To go back to your thing, Jason, we're going door to door. We're falling in love with the process of what does it take to get this random stranger who opens the door to not slam it in our face. What works, what doesn't work, and what's the fun and what's the excitement that comes from that. And people who don't perform, they kill all that. They douse the flame. And that should be something that's terrifying to every leader. And the longer you allow that to exist, the more damaging it becomes.
Yeah, I love that. There was I can't remember whose quote it was, so I can't give them credit. But there's this leadership quote that I heard. It's like, people, like what people do is what you tolerate. Mm-hmm. So if there's behavior that you don't like on your team, it's simply because you tolerate it. And I've been using this word a lot with myself and my tiny team, the word unacceptable. I sent out a couple marketing emails, one marketing email a couple weeks ago through HubSpot we just started using, and it had a typo. Like there was like 3 or 4 letters before the first name. And I was like, that's unacceptable. Like that can't happen again, you guys. Like I made that mistake, but that cannot happen. That's unacceptable. I got to be better than that, And I think as a leader, that's not that I'm going to use this analogy, but I don't think that your reps are dogs, but like training a puppy, I'm going to use that analogy. When you're training a puppy, it's so critical to like catch every little thing that they do. And as soon as you see them start to do the right thing, you immediately mark it, right? Yes. Or you use a clicker or whatever, and you treat them. So as soon as you see them going to the door to go potty instead of taking a shit all over the floor, it's like you're going to like treat that, And I think something that's really difficult, especially as a manager, is like you have to be all over the little things and reading people's intention. And when you see them doing the right thing, like letting them know and also correcting behavior that's bad too and nipping it in the bud quick. And that takes a lot of discipline. But that is something I've seen really, really great sales managers, especially, are all over it. They are all over those little things.
How you do the little things is how you do everything. Like that's totally cliche to say, but are you capitalizing this person's name in an email? How's your signature look? Is your signature misspelled? Are you using the correct grammar? Are you using punctuation? Control your controllables. Like there's so many things that go wrong in a sales process. Why would you not take every little variable that you can out of play? And so, again, unacceptable, like whether you're sending an email or whether you see something wrong in a product, like you have to be nitpicky and OCD about every little thing, because all those little things, if they're accepted, grow into bigger things. And the company and your team learns to tolerate small mistakes.
Yeah. It's especially the effort-driven stuff. The stuff that, to your point, Kyle, your point earlier, that people actually have control over.
Yeah.
the effort, the activity, whether or not they decide to respond to an objection in a certain way. It's like this catching of that behavior, and it's like, hey, that's unacceptable. You can't be doing that stuff. You know, I think that having a very serious attitude when it comes to that stuff, I think is super important. Last thing I want to end with here is delivering coaching and what kind of like the coaching cadence might look like. I think there's a lot of ambiguity on, you know, what do I talk about in a one-on-one? Is it mostly deal reviews? Like there's really very little coaching oftentimes that happens in a one-on-one. But when you guys think about coaching cadence, like what are the touch points when coaching could be delivered throughout a week, throughout a month? Like when do we want to actually be doing coaching? What does that look like for a manager?
I'll take that one. So first things first, one-on-ones in my mind are not meant for coaching. One-on-ones are for, opening up on things, figuring stuff out, working through other things. So I always believe in dedicated time spent for coaching. What I'll do for my rep, now we have now and then previous roles, it'll be more ad hoc throughout the week. Like if someone's crushing it and doing a great job, like we're not going to spend time coaching. If somebody is struggling and needs help, what I always do is I'll say, hey, I'm happy to help you. But before I agree to spend some time with you, you're going to coach yourself first. And you're going to come with what you think you could have done better and what you think you did well on those calls. And then I will go and I'll review them for you. So just like, if you're not willing to do the work to coach yourself, why are you coming to me to have me coach you as well? And so it's another good culture building thing, kind of making reps do it themselves. But I don't like having a regular cadence for coaching just because some reps don't need it. Like they're doing great, crushing it, awesome. Other reps need it every single day. And so it's a little bit more ad hoc in my mind and a little bit more dynamic and fluid based upon what's needed at the moment.
Al?
Yeah, I have a bit more structure. I typically like to do coaching 2 to 3 times per week. And even if somebody's doing really well, I like having them included there because I'm a big fan of having other reps on the team coach in specific areas that they're really good at. So if I look at the data and I see that one of the top performers has a really high show up rate, for example, and then one of the lower performers struggles with show up rate, I actually won't give the feedback to the rep. I'll have the person who's really good at it give the feedback because I like that kind of collaboration. Anyway, so I do like that. The one-on-ones, there's only coaching if it really needs to be. I think it's better to handle other issues in one-on-ones than using that time to dissect a cold call. But sometimes reps need it, so I will include it there as well. And if there's a manager on the team, their job all day, every day should be live coaching reps. Listening to calls and giving them feedback right afterwards, helping them with their emails. Like the manager role, in my opinion, is 80% coaching, 20% admin. And admin includes, putting data together and rolling it up to me or whoever.
Yeah. It's that ad hoc coaching time. It's the stuff between the one-on-ones throughout the week, for sure. Where it's like, you should know if a rep is, like if you guys have diagnosed that, hey, low email reply rates are the biggest needle mover for this rep.
Yeah.
I should be, as a manager, looking at their emails throughout the week and critiquing them and providing feedback like ad hoc style, Yeah. I do like, Greg, what you mentioned around self-coaching as well. And I think one other thing, Kyle, you said 2 to 3 times a week, enabling reps to coach each other. I think having a dedicated team call each week dedicated to like group style coaching is a skill that I see a lot of managers struggle with. How can I get 10 reps into a call for 30 to 45 minutes and actually make it a productive use of time?
So a couple of things. There's always it depends. There's a little asterisk I give on everything I say because it depends on the organization, how large they are, what the structure of the team is, and what resources they have. But I just tell you, in a situation where there's a manager in place, that manager should come with calls. They should also expect their reps to come with calls too. And they should go through specific rep calls, but a lot of it should come from what they heard that day. So I believe in the situational coaching being probably the most impactful, next to fundamentals. But like, for example, a manager, let's say your team is just cold calling and nothing else, just a fake scenario here. That manager should be listening to as many cold calls as they can every single day. And at the end of that day, they should highlight areas that people are struggling with and give feedback on how to improve in those areas. And that's what I would expect out of a manager. And I would also expect my reps to come with things that they need help on too, especially if we're doing it 3 times a week. So a little bit of a mix of both would be my answer.
Gotcha. And with that being said, that's all we got for you guys today. We're about out of time. I think there's a couple big kind of takeaways. There's the sales math piece. Make sure to check out Kyle's resource. We talked about scorecarding. Make sure to check that out. And I think this culture piece, to kind of wrap everything up, super, super important. I want to thank you, Kyle and Greg, for your time and the rest of the audience.
Pleasure.
As well. And the engagement was awesome. Make sure to check out Abstrakt. I'm going to drop Kyle's LinkedIn profile in here. Make sure to blow his LinkedIn up. Greg's as well. Make sure to check out Abstrakt if you guys are looking for any kind of conversational intelligence help and call coaching and all that kind of stuff. And
which
Kyle's
you
doing
should be interested in, by the way. Just to like double click, I'm a firm believer in tools that help in this area, and Abstrakt's one of the best. So I highly recommend. If you don't have a tool like that, that's crazy. You should have one.
Thanks, guys, for the shout out. Appreciate it. Kyle, appreciate the disagreements too.
Yeah, I love it. This stuff's always fun for me. And, everyone runs teams differently, and we want you to be successful. We want everyone here to be successful. Yep. And like I said, there's always it depends. You have to do what works for you and your culture.
Yep. There you go.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
Have a good rest of your
day. Thanks, everybody.
Later.